The sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. So the demand and supply are not matching.
Fission has been going on, from the 60s or 70s. So why hasn't fusion been commercialized yet?
If you look at Japan, for example, the buildings use 80% steel and 20% concrete. If you look at most of the developing world, they use 80% concrete and 20% steel. From a climate point of view, urbanization is not bad.
With the rapid increase in, let's say, the 10-minute delivery, especially in the urban settings, the e-commerce penetration in India, so many things that wouldn't need packaging otherwise are coming in packaging material that is just completely discarded.
The tools of votes, wallets, and voices is very important.
Out of the next 4 to 5 years, what do you expect? Do you hope that things would move in the right direction from a climate point of view? Which area in India will be the worst affected?
I think the Indo-Gangetic Belt.
Who's the biggest climate hypocrite? Corporations, politicians, or celebrities? Today we have Mr. Rajan Mehta, the best-selling author of Backstage Climate. He's a serial tech entrepreneur and has successfully founded 2 companies. In 2022, he went to Harvard University as a research fellow where he focused his efforts on climate change. He is now leading climate action labs dedicated to driving impactful solutions to mitigate this crisis. The world is shifting from a unipolar to a multipolar global order. Trump is back and power is realigning. AI is rising, reshaping jobs and rewriting futures. The planet is warming up while the birth rates fall. To see these in isolation is to miss the bigger picture. A world which is unsteady, unpredictable and transforming before our eyes. Let's make sense of the happening from India's lens, one conversation at a time. Welcome to the Nagrik Podcast with Hari. Say the 3 different levers that you mentioned, right? So we had fossils, industry, and land use. Let's probably talk, briefly about the different initiatives that are going across, these 3, let's say, main sources of greenhouse gases. So you said that in fossil fuels, the major factor is, of course, electricity generation. The second is transportation, and the third is heating for heat purposes. Let's probably sort of go into the rabbit hole of all these different factors and try to understand what the world is doing so that people are able to comprehensively understand that all the existing problems have a solution set that's being developed by the world, right?
There's a lot happening, to be honest. Our scientists, technologists, policymakers, financiers, entrepreneurs, they're all they've rolled up their sleeves and are working. So if you look at energy per se, right, there's a whole move towards renewable energy. That's how you see these solar panels popping up everywhere and windmills coming up everywhere. So the transition is happening. And if I was to guess, I think probably we are already at around 20% or so of renewable energy globally.
Electricity generation, 20% of that is coming from the renewables. Right. Interesting.
But there are challenges. The sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. So the demand and supply are not matching, right? So therefore, you're now looking at storage technologies so that when renewables are producing, but there's not much avenue to use that energy, you start storing it to be able to use in energy lean, or production lean periods, right? So that's really going on. You need to kind of enhance and smarten the grid also because it becomes very complex when you're adding too many sources of energy production and too many endpoints that are using it. So I won't go into the details, but I'd like to mention that useful as they are, solar and wind, they have their limitations. One I mentioned in terms of the match of supply and demand. Also, they create a lot of waste, right? And we need to see that waste has a carbon footprint as well. Now, how do we handle it? And looking at the way global energy needs are increasing, because our life is becoming more and more comfortable. Everything is getting automated, all that needs energy. And if I was to just kind of think, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, how do we meet the kind of energy demand? My own thinking is that we will need to explore other sources of energy. And if we want something clean, we should not give up on nuclear. right? So nuclear has been a bad word so far because, especially after the Fukushima this thing. But there are some people who've been silently working on it. Bill Gates is one of them, who've been trying to make it cheaper and safer, right? This I'm talking about the nuclear fission, right? But even if we make it cheaper, safer, nuclear fission has inherent issue, and the issue is that it can spark a chain reaction. And if it does spark a chain reaction, you can't control it, and disasters can follow. Well, they're trying to address that by having small modular units and stuff like that. And I think we'll make some breakthrough in that. But what I wanted to kind of also talk to you about is a new avatar of nuclear, which is nuclear fusion, right, which is coming up. It's been in the research labs for multiple decades, and hopefully in the next decade or so, we should see it kind of making its contributions. Nuclear fission is when you have an atom and you break it up, and as you break it up, it releases energy. Nuclear fusion is the opposite. There are two atoms, you combine them, and when you combine them, the combined atom releases energy, because the mass of the combined atom is lesser than the two atoms. So E is equal to mc square, plays a role there. Now, nuclear fusion is how sun generates its energy. So basically what we're trying to do is mimic that, right? And 2 years back at the Livermore Berkeley Institute, they experimented, and for the first time there was a positive experiment done wherein the amount of energy required to fuse or bring the two atoms together was less than the amount of energy the fused atom released, right? Which was very positive and very encouraging, which shows that we are on the right path. So I do hope and believe that we are able to get nuclear power into commercial production, because it doesn't have the inherent disadvantage of nuclear fission, which means that it cannot go on to a chain reaction and be destructive, because you can always stop the fusion, the supply of the atoms to stop the reaction. Yeah.
Interesting. So you're saying that, let's say, in terms of the overall landscape, we have solar, wind, nuclear fission is already active. It has its own, set of problems like cost, but the main thing is the safety concern, especially when we, saw the event in Japan in probably around 2011 or something, 2011. And then you're saying that the new technology, which is fusion, is something. And I think we also saw recent news coming from China, if I'm not wrong, a few days back, where I think they were able to sustain some reaction for, I think just a few days back, 15, 20 minutes. But yeah, it was something to that tune. So again, I think over the last few weeks, very interesting announcements have been coming out of China in terms of, let's say, energy, AI, and so on and so forth. Right?
There are many other sources of energy. There's geothermal, there's tidal wave, there's many others. But you got to see what you can scale, with minimal disturbance to the nature.
Right. But any particular reason, like just doubling down on the fusion bit, any particular reason why the development, or let's say the commercialization of this technology is taking so much time? I mean, fission has been going on, from the 60s or 70s. So why hasn't fusion been commercialized yet?
See, when you're bringing atoms together, for example, when it happens in the sun, the temperature would be 100 million degrees centigrade. The pressure would be 1 billion units, let's say. So what you do is you take the two atoms, and for fusing them, you got to kind of bring them into a plasma state, right? Through this high temperature and high pressure. And it's very difficult to retain that plasma stage. Right now, to my best knowledge, it's been done only for seconds.
Right. And I think that's what happened in China. I think they were able to sustain this plasma state for about 18 minutes or something. So maybe step in that. Okay.
And how do you do it? Because if you're going to use more energy to fuse, then it's no point. So that's what kind of our scientists and technologists are working on. It's a very, very complex thing to achieve. Yeah.
Interesting. So again, technological complexity of, let's say, being able to generate that high a temperature and maintain that pressure is the
And then how do you convert it into power? Because if the fused this thing comes in contact with the surface, the heat is lost. So you have to kind of maintain it in isolation and then convert into power. So yeah.
Cool. So I think we talked about electricity. So I think there's definitely a lot of hope that, let's say, even beyond solar, wind, and the fission things, we have new technologies coming up, and then of course the edge cases of geothermal and so on. But they will never, I'm assuming, take the lion's share of electricity generation ever. But not sure.
Never say no, but at the moment, that's how it looks like. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Let's move to the second one. Right. The second biggest factor after electricity is transportation. What sort of technologies? Of course, EVs being the one. But let's say if we could briefly talk about what sort of new technologies are coming up, in to tackle this particular problem of emissions from the transportation sector.
So let's break it down into three: road transport, sea, and then air. And in road also, there's short haul and there's long haul, right? Uh, for the short haul, it's EVs coming up, driven by batteries, right? And mainly it's the lithium-ion batteries and its various derivative forms that are taking hold. I think the world is making reasonable progress. If you see the percentage of electric vehicles sold within the total pie of vehicles being sold, it's been increasing. And I think it'll only get better because as the cost comes down and as the efficiency increases, it'll increase. The three barriers to that today are: one is the charging infrastructure, second is the cost, and third is what we call as the range anxiety, or how far can the battery, one charge up of the battery take you. And those are getting addressed, so less to worry about the short haul. In the long haul, which is trucks and buses and stuff like that, battery technology is again being developed, but they're also looking at hydrogen as a fuel there. And you must have heard about a lot of talk about green hydrogen, which would be used. So there have been some commercial pilots as well going on. As hydrogen becomes cheaper and more prevalent, that may kind of take off there. Then is shipping. Again, lots happening there, but what I at least see is that hydrogen or ammonia, a derivative of hydrogen, seems to be kind of getting traction there. There are some fringe solutions also being spoken about, where they're saying like they will make ships hybrid with part sails and part driven through fuel like hydrogen. But we'll see how that. And in air is the challenging one because batteries being very heavy make it are not suitable. Hydrogen being very voluminous is not suitable. So what they are banking on is sustainable aviation fuel made from sources which do not have a net contribution, so biofuels and stuff like that. But I must also mention that for short haul, they are looking at hydrogen planes, and I believe there have been some positive experiments done as well.
Interesting. So broadly, we are saying that in the transportation sector, if we consider all road, sea, and let's say air, we have EVs, battery-based systems, mainly lithium-ion,
And then fuel cell based. Some people they haven't really become popular as yet, but hopefully, we'll see which one finally wins.
Interesting. And let's say the second one would be hydrogen. And then even there we are talking about, given, being associated with, this industry on and off, that, you have green hydrogen or brown hydrogen and so on based on the, source of electricity, right?
So yeah, it's almost like the whip jar, all colors of hydrogen.
Interesting. So again, I think solid progress happening on the transportation front as well. Of course, the adoption remains the key due to multiple factors, as you mentioned, around range anxiety, cost, and so on. Now, let's say moving on to the third factor, it's heating. Any material progress or similar technologies?
So what they're doing is, they're using heat pumps, and there are two technologies. One is the ground-based heat pumps, and second is the air-based. Basically, what it does is, for example, in winters, instead of burning fuel to heat the homes, you install a heat pump. It has a, something like a refrigerant. So in the winters, below that, the temperature of the ground remains constant, below a certain depth, right? So what you do is you circulate that refrigerant between the place that you want to heat and that ground. So it picks up heat from the ground, brings it into the room that you want to heat, releases it there and back. Same principle on which the refrigerators work, right? So you can do it either ground-based or you can do it air-based. Air-based, in my view, works better for cooling or in summers. The ground-based works better in winters, but I'm not really kind of an expert in that area. But it does kind of help you save on a lot of emissions. I think the challenges in this are that so far they were not very effective in very cold temperatures. And also the cost factor was there. Both ground-based heat pumps and air-based ones otherwise are kind of surfacing now.
So again, these would be mostly, I'm assuming, used in the higher up, let's say, Tropic of Capricorn, I think above in the colder countries. So like north of Europe to, let's say, Canada, northern areas of United States and so on. Interesting.
And same thing for industrial heat. See, earlier there was a lot of wasted heat, right? And nobody bothered. But now in industries, they're trying to see how they can make sure that any heat that is being wasted is reused, right? So I think that saves a lot as well.
So let's move into the next category, right? We've I think thoroughly covered the problem and the solution space in the fossils. Now let's, if we talk about the industry, we mentioned cement and steel. What sort of steps are being taken in these domains to
So see that there are two ways that industry contributes to emissions. One is by the sheer energy it uses, electricity, right? And that electricity is coming ultimately from thermal sources, so it's contributing, right? As electricity moves to renewables, the negative impact of industry will reduce in terms of emissions, right? The second is through its processes. So far, most of the industry has used chemical processes aided, and the reactions are aided by heat, right? Now, that the chemical processes are being changed to electrochemical processes, right? So that you can control the emission of carbon dioxide, right? And in some of these, hydrogen is being used or other things. And the moment you move into electrochemical, the requirement of heat goes down as well, right? And therefore, that will help bring down the emissions. And as I mentioned to you, that heat itself is being looked at separately in terms of being able to use the wasted heat, reuse the wasted heat, and also can you develop heat through electricity rather than through fuels? Because so far, generating very high temperatures through electric heat has been difficult. So that's how they've been using fossil fuel heat. So they're trying to see, can they have electric alternatives to that? The moment they have electric alternatives, and when the electricity becomes renewable, that comes down. Now, these are in terms of how you control it, right? Let's say there are existing emissions happening in the industry, and they are not able to change their process, or they're not able to change their energy mix, and the industry is continuing to emit a lot of carbon dioxide. So you can now capture carbon dioxide at the chimney, right, through processes called as carbon capture and sequestration. You can capture it, you can condense it, you can sequester it, and then maybe either use it, use this carbon to make products, or you could store it in the ground. So this is happening as well. So these are some of the ways I would think industry can, contribute. Other than also bringing in the principles of circular economy, for example. Now, if you look at steel, let's say steel 1 kg of steel uses or emits 1 kg of carbon dioxide. But now, if you process used steel, right, scrap steel, that emits only, that uses 70% less energy. So will emit only 300 grams of carbon dioxide compared to 1 kg. So, using used feedstock in many of these industries will help as well.
And I think specifically, developing countries can, take, major steps in this direction of how, through maybe, I'm not sure how the old feedstock is going to come from, maybe developing the developed nations itself. But let's say, cement and steel, both, which are, energy intensive and sources of carbon, if you'll be able to use the old and we are able to recycle some of them, I think developing countries specifically, which are on the cusp of rapid urbanization or growth, they can substantially decline their.
I think that, yeah, and you're right. No, I'll give you an example. For example, how regulation can play a role here. If you look at the developed world, they have building codes that when you construct buildings, they are as per a certain specification, right? If you look at Japan, for example, the buildings use 80% steel and 20% concrete. If you look at most of the developing world, it's the reverse. They use 80% concrete and 20% steel. Now, the reason why they use 80% steel is because steel is recyclable, whereas concrete is not very efficiently recyclable, right? So if you take the life cycle carbon footprint of buildings constructed as per the Japanese building codes, it'll be much lower than the life cycle carbon emissions of similar buildings in developing world, because there's very little steel, and the steel cannot be, only that much of steel is recycled.
And any particular reason, like technology?
I think it's...
Or just pure regulation?
Yeah, I think they probably figured it out earlier, and they had, more steel production, whatever. It's the same development graph that you go through, the development curve that you go through.
Even let's say the materials being used in buildings is has such a drastic mix or difference between
The built environment is one of the largest contributors of greenhouse gases.
And then let's talk about one example that I can think of at the moment is how, when you talk about recycled steel or let's say recycled cement, is there an existing supply chain that exists, or like are developing is let's say how do you get recycled steel? Is it coming from the developed countries or?
No, actually, developed countries would like to keep it within their country because, and there are very established channels. I may be wrong on my figures, but out of the steel produced in many of these developed countries, 70% is through scrap now. That's the rate of recycling. Whereas in the developing world, the rate of recycling is very low. Right. So although like in India, we have a very efficient way by way of kabadis and, that the steel goes. But I think there's much higher scope of further, strengthening these reverse cycles.
We can say that the circular economy for cement and steel is very, very nascent in the developing world, and it has a lot of runway to, let's say, right? Interesting. Cool. So I think we covered the first two cases of, let's say, the fossil fuels and the industry. The third one, and probably less intuitive for a lot of folks, would be the land use, right, and agriculture. So what sort of steps are being taken to reduce the carbon or greenhouse footprint from this?
So the first one is what is becoming popular now is no-till farming, right? Because earlier people were kind of tilling and then sowing. Now they do it without tilling, horizontally plant this thing. And I believe it's been successful. I don't have the data on that. So
is it being starting to be used in India as well?
I'm not sure about India, but I know in many of the Western countries it is being I'm sure they must be trying it in India as well. So that's number one. Second, I had mentioned about during cultivation, for example, rice, you have to flood the fields and therefore a lot of methane comes out. They're looking at alternate methodologies for cultivation and growing rice. One is called the alternate wetting and drying, and many other techniques that have come up. It's a process change. It's a process change. The third is avoiding food wastage, right? Also, when you harvest, like in India, you have stubble and you burn that. You have also a lot of biomass that comes out of the harvest. Some is usable, some is not. So the non-usable one earlier were left to decomposition, and so now you're generating bioenergy from that, right? Also, a lot of food used to go waste in transportation, in storage, in retail, right? So you coming up with cold storages, cold chains, and all that stuff. It's being right. Even packaging, for example, you would have heard that a lot of times this controversy came about wax being put on apples to make them look good, but actually the reason was that it increases the shelf life and therefore avoids wastage, right? Now the quality of wax and other things obviously needs to be proper and all. So, but things like that help avoid food wastage. And even at the dining table, a lot gets wasted. So we need to see, even if it gets wasted, that instead of allowing it to decompose, we compost it so that the impact can be reduced. When it comes to cattle in the Western world, you would know they're coming up with plant-based meat now, plant-based dairy products and all. They've had a mix of success and, but yeah. But I think, they're not stopping further development of those. So the best is to go for a plant-based vegetarian meal, but a balanced meal. But if you can't, then the alternative could be the plant-based meat, and So these are some of the things that are happening there. In terms of the cattle itself, as I said, they give out methane. There are probiotic feeds being developed, and if you feed them to the cattle, the methane production could go down by almost 30 to 40%. And again, their manure gives out a lot of methane. So now you have biogas plants that are coming up. So steps are being taken to address these emissions.
Interesting. So let's say pretty much across all of these domains, we have some or the other process / technology changes that are trying to reduce it.
The issue is speed and scale, right? Yeah. So that needs to be expedited.
Now, I think so far till now we've majorly discussed, the global topics, right? So I think over the next few set of questions, we would talk a little bit more about India, right? Again, India being a huge country, we initially started the discussion with Delhi, right? How the winters have gotten even, shallower with time. And definitely, I think one of the concerns that we have is with increasing migration, from rural areas, the overall urbanization that's happening in the few areas, which is like Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore, it's going through the roof. So what sort of impact will these cities have when there's so much urban migration happening?
From a climate point of view, urbanization is not bad, right? If you see cities like New York, the per capita carbon footprint of an individual in New York would be lower than the per capita carbon footprint of a person in a suburban area, because you optimize on a lot of things in a urban environment, right? That having been said, I think urbanization is required for India, because as we have to meet our aspiration of growth, development, that's a good thing. Now, whether the migrations should happen only to Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore is questionable. There should be other metropolitan areas created or migrations happening to other places. And it's a question of opportunity and other things, right? What I would like to say, since you asked, migrations into these cities uh, are not good, uh, especially from a air quality point of view and environmental point of view and pollution point of view, because as that happens, the need for transportation, the need for energy, the construction, the devastation of the natural habitats there all happens, and all those kind of contribute do emit. There are a lot of emissions that happen. The gaseous part of the emissions go on to change climate, and the particulate matter of those emissions creates air pollution, right? I think the bigger challenge in these cities right now is the air pollution that we need to, and air pollution has an impact on climate as well. We'll not go into the details right now, but I think that's what we should be worried about.
Interesting. So that was, I think, quite a unique insight that, let's say, urbanization is not so bad from a climate point of view, because again it leads to optimization of resources, and the per capita footprint, let's say, starts to reduce. But more from the point of view of, let's say, air pollution or all of those factors that may get intensified in a small subset of area. Interesting. Now, I think one of the key areas where you have also started, or you were associated, is, let's say, you taking certain initiatives from how to, take care of, the rapid rise in packaging and so on materials, right? So, with the rapid increase in, let's say, the 10-minute delivery, especially in the urban settings, the e-commerce penetration in India, we are seeing that uh, so many things that wouldn't need packaging otherwise are coming in heaps, and packaging material that is just completely discarded once that product is delivered. So how do you think these things are creating an impact, from not just from a waste point of view, but also their climatic impact overall?
So, excess packaging is a scourge, actually, and it does kind of has a very deteriorating kind of an impact, both from waste point of view, and if you go backstream, I think somewhere it does go and impact pollution and climate as well, right? Having said that, as we grow and as e-com comes up and fast deliveries or quick commerce comes up, these are things we have to live with, right? Because they're also serving a purpose, right? And I don't think so. In today's world, you can ban anything. It doesn't work. And as long as it's making our lives comfortable, we should encourage that. The idea is, how do you make it uh, ecologically neutral, climatically neutral? I think that's where we need to really focus on, right? So if you look at packaging, for example, it's a big waste, right? So can we explore the idea of creating reusable packaging, right? Uh, in fact, in our at Climate Action Labs, we are kind of working on that to create a blueprint for that, where packaging once created can be reused over and over. It does need a lot of groundwork in terms of creating common standards for packaging and other things, but that's something that we are kind of digging into, right? Uh, Having said all that, I think we need to be mindful of overconsumption, right? Uh, and I don't want to be misconstrued here. What we need, we must get and we must have, and the industry must produce and services must flow. All that is required. But overconsumption sometimes is the negative impact of overconsumption uh, could is not good from a pollution point of view or from a climate point of view. So we just need to be mindful about that.
Sure. And I think, as you said, right, I think it'll be very interesting, and I think everyone would be looking forward to some of the efforts that, let's say, Climate Action Labs is making in to come up with a blueprint of, let's say, how packaging could be reused, across, or let's say some of the reverse logistics infrastructure can be, put together. And then I think lastly, just to close, India's discussion, again, one thing that everybody, especially in urban areas, would, love or would hope for is that, more and more conversations from our political leaders, starts happening on these issues. So I think my question, or one thing that I would love to understand from you, is what do you think prevents the Indian, political leaders or the class that's, that wants to be elected to basically, to discuss about these topics? What is preventing, and let's say, what should the citizens, let's say, do so that we are able to have more fruitful conversations, and the discourse, especially on the climate front, starts improving?
Sure. Politicians are very smart, right? Uh, and I don't necessarily mean it in the negative sense. Uh, they have a keen sense to observe and know what their electorate wants, and they will deliver that, right? People who wanted 5 kg of rice free every month have been getting it, right? People who wanted water to be free, electricity to be free, are getting it. So it depends upon us. What do we want, and how do we communicate it to the leaders? If we communicate it effectively and in the numbers, they will deliver it, because they are interested to come back to power, and they know the secret sauce for getting back to power is to keep their people happy, right? And they will keep them happy by delivering what people want. So, what I would say, since you asked what should we do, I think we sometimes underestimate our power, right? As normal citizens, we have the power of the votes. We also have the power of the wallets, and we have our voices, right? If we use them effectively, change will happen, right? It's we who go and vote on frivolous issues, right? If climate is important to us, right, and we let it be known to the leaders, right, we make sure that they put it in their manifesto, we hold their feet to fire through their tenure, telling them whether they are doing it or not, right, you will see them delivering on climate, right? Same thing with our wallets. I'm taking the discussion away from politicians to the business as well, right? Businesses can be flagrant today. They are greenwashing, doing this, doing that, But if you start using your wallets effectively, right, spending them on buying products which are green, genuinely green, supporting companies which are doing something for climate, in the long run, those companies will become successful. The not so good ones, or the not so green ones, will wither away, and change will happen, right? Because they know their customers want this, right? Same thing with our voices. We have that power. We don't use it, actually, right? If we kind of use that to keep giving constant feedback, raising our concerns, raising our desires, I think change will happen. So the tools of votes, wallets, and voices is very important, very powerful.
I think that's a great framework to, just keep in mind that, we constantly need to remind our the elected class that these are areas of concern for not just a few but majority of the population. We should be forcing through our, let's say, through the products that we purchase, to force businesses to make amends to the way they produce, and then through, obviously, mediums like these, where we are, having discussions and raising our concerns.
You look at EVs, for example. Today they may be more expensive than ICs, but if some of us who can afford to give that extra premium do that, it'll help as the economies of scale kick in. Their cost will come down, so that it becomes a very easy choice for consumers then. If tomorrow EVs are at par with IC engines or cheaper, nobody will buy IC engines, right? So I think that's where our role lies.
So even you saying that, in terms of, let's say, people who have the, the potential to buy these products, the haves, or let's say the have-nots, the haves should be, moving into, buying climate conscious products, so that the positive feedback loops start kicking.
We can't expect everybody. If, let's say, a IC is 100 and a EV is 200, there are many people who can't afford it today. But there are some who can, right? The ones who can, if they start investing in that, the price of EVs will come down rapidly. It'll become 100 so that everyone can afford it then, So,
and even let's say, the second, third order effects would be the associated infrastructure is going to come up even. So even the concerns around range anxiety or charging infrastructure.
they'll wither away like this. Absolutely, yeah.
US, as the global superpower or whatnot. So we've seen Donald Trump has kind of entered the White House. We are seeing that AI race is consistently getting heated up. China is developing or moving ahead in this entire race, and even as India and China, they start to develop even more as India moves on to a $10 trillion economy. We'll see all of these things getting even accelerated as in a way the demand for energy, right? So in all of these things, from a political standpoint and from the technology that's brewing up, which is AI, we see that energy is going to become even more critical. So keeping aside the things that we discuss, what do you expect out of the next 4 to 5 years, right? Wherein there has been a change in the political setup. What do you expect? Do you hope that things would move in the right direction from a climate point of view?
I think so. India is definitely committed to it and has been doing its bit for it. China is actually leapfrogging. Its size is humongous, but it's leapfrogging. And in all honesty, most of the research and development related to, reining in climate change is happening in the US. So all are contributing. But I wanted to touch on, since you asked what is in the current global geopolitical situation, what is likely to happen. I think in this fragile geopolitical for every country, energy security becomes very critical. It does for India, I'm sure for US and for China as well. Just to speak about India, right? If you look at our energy mix today, right? Probably, I don't have the correct figures, but I would guess 75% of our energy probably comes from thermal sources, right? Around 20% comes from renewables, right? But for India, our primary source of energy is coal, right? Therefore, we cannot really so quickly give it up from an energy security perspective, because the 20% of solar and wind, most of the infrastructure equipment is imported, right? So tomorrow something happens geopolitically, what are we going to do? So we have to be very careful about that. Now we need to make it clean. I'm not saying that, yeah, India, yeah, go, only for... We have to make it clean. We have to make sure that, it is not as polluting, do whatever needs to be done. I think we are kind of moving in that direction. But you can't say, okay, put a stop to coal tomorrow, right? That may not be a sensible thing to do, right? From a geopolitical energy security point of view, right? Similarly, when it comes to renewable solar and all, I think our focus needs to be on, or whatever other technology, whether it's nuclear fusion, we need to start participating in research programs in this. Make sure that we are at the cutting edge, because if you really see the next 30, 40, 50 years, I think the hotbed for growth should be India, right? Globally. Therefore, the need for energy, the need for a lot of this infrastructure, equipment, the materials, other things is going to be out of this country, our country, right? And we must kind of foresee that and sense that if we need so much of, we are going to have so much of growth and need so much of material and technology, we must start producing it, developing it here, whether it's in terms of R&D or production and then final usage, and then use it as a hub to export it and improve our dominance in the world. I think that part needs to be looked at very, very carefully and pursued. That how do we take advantage of this disruption that is happening in the energy systems for our advantage, rather than being a bystander and a user of technologies being developed by others.
Whenever some sort of a disruption is happening, right? And pretty much disruption is happening all across the board, from energy systems to, let's say, new energy technologies, right? And if we
time for innovation.
right, and if exactly, and given that India will need all of these things, even more so over the next 2-3 decades, it becomes a very strong imperative for everyone in the country to kind of marshal the resources and start moving in this direction even more, right? So no, I think that's a very strong, I think, ending note before we move into the last section of our discussion, which is we call it no asterisk, which is a quick rapid fire round. The first question is the one thing India is doing better than the West in climate action.
The transition to renewable energy.
One underreported climate issue in India.
It could be our methane leakages.
Let's say if climate, global warming were to take place, which area in India will be the worst affected?
I think the Indo-Gangetic belt, right from Punjab down to almost Assam.
Okay, interesting. Due to severe heating.
I think also the melting of the glaciers, the heat wave belt, and this is also the agricultural belt. A lot of our people's livelihoods depend upon agriculture there. So if there is an impact of climate change, their livelihoods will get impacted as well.
Is banning plastic straws really making an impact?
Very, very minuscule.
Who's the biggest climate hypocrite? Corporations, politicians, or celebrities?
Tough one. I would think celebrities. Many of them who are flying around, zipping around.
Out of the three sources, which one would you pick? Nuclear, solar, or wind?
Nuclear. Fusion.
Nuclear fusion. Okay, something which is still
Yeah.
in development. What's the one inconvenient truth about climate change that people refuse to accept?
That it's happening. It's real. People are in denial. Many of them.
And finally, again, which three countries do you think would be the worst affected? Not areas in, let's say, India, but which three countries would be worst affected by climate?
It'll be the island states in the Polynesian belt. There's one country called Kiribati, which has a population of 34,000. I'm told they will probably be the first ones to go down. And a couple of years back, they bought 20 square kilometers of land in Fiji just to rehabilitate their population.
Interesting. And any major country which you see getting impacted, like the earliest, let's say?
I haven't done that, because there's so many parameters on which you can kind of measure this. I don't know. But I would think Bangladesh is another one because of the low-lying. Yeah, that's the best I can.
No, I think that's a solid end to the rapid fire round. And again, thanks, Rajan, for having such an insightful discussion into the entire spectrum of the climate change discourse, whether it's the unknown facts from the science of what's causing climate change to, let's say, the political realities of the world today, which we need to confront day in, day out, so that our elected leaders hear the concerns, the people know about all of these. Any final note on which you'd love to end?
Well, I enjoyed the discussion, and I hope that you and me and many others like us actually do our bit to control or to harness this monster. Yeah. Great.
Great talking, Rajan. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hari.